So I think that we can all agree, options are good, but give us too many options to choose from and we can easily feel overwhelmed. And as a result, we may find ourselves failing to make any sort of decision at all. This is at least how I felt when I was just getting started growing flowers and I was trying to decide on which seed starting tray to purchase. I mean, no one wants to spend money only to find out later that they invested in the wrong trays. And so today I'm hoping to put your mind at ease. In this video specifically, I thought we'd discuss the pros and the cons to some of the different seed trays out there in the market. And I also want to show you some of my favorite trays to use and even give you some considerations to think about when you're selecting your own trays. So if you're wanting to learn more, let's go. Now, in general, all seed trays serve the same purpose. They hold your soil in place so that you can grow healthy transplants for your flower garden. By planting your seeds in a single tray, it makes it easier to treat your seedlings all the same as they're in the same container. You can water the entire tray at once, you can transport your seedlings at once. You know, when it's time to plant, you just have to handle a single tray and bring it out into the garden with you. Now, as you can see from the seed trays that I have right here in front of me, these trays have roughly the same dimensions. You know, the same overall width and length. And for the most part, all the trays that I'll share with you today, they fit inside the same 10-20 standard bottom watering tray. The biggest difference among trays is really found in the number of cells that they contain. Cell counts vary widely in trays. And you can find trays that have 32 cells, 50, 72, all the way up to 128, 288, and beyond. Now, the more cells in a single tray, the smaller each individual cell will be. So for example, the cells of this 50 cell tray will be larger than those in this 72 cell tray. Choosing which cell count to use is based partly on preference and how much room you have available to start seeds, and then it's based partly on the needs of the seeds that you're growing. You see, the size of a cell, it limits the growth of a seedling. Smaller cells naturally leave less space for seedlings to grow. Ideally, we want to give the seedling as much room as it needs to expand its roots and put on top growth so that it really thrives before we put it out in the garden. During the growing process, if your seedling runs out of room to grow, generally what happens is that the seedling becomes root bound. When this happens, the roots of your seedling become so entangled that they have a hard time absorbing nutrients from the soil. Now, some seedlings can bounce back after becoming root bound, but it's better if we can prevent this altogether, as root bound plants can experience stunted growth, delayed flowering, or in extreme conditions, they can just flat out not survive at all. Now, understand that the purpose of seed starting is to produce a robust plant start. So giving our seedling the proper amount of room to grow is very important. Like I said, in an ideal situation, we'd give our plants as much room as possible. But for a lot of us who grow seedlings on any kind of scale, the problem is that we often don't have unlimited space. I personally have a number of wired shelves where I grow all of my plant starts. The shelves are 4 foot wide, and so on one shelf I can fit 4 trays. If I'm growing my seedlings in 32 cell trays, for instance, that means that one shelf can hold a grand total of 128 seedlings. You know, 4 trays times 32 cells. Now compare that to if I were growing my seedlings in 72 cell trays. Suddenly that same amount of real estate on my wire shelf is enough to grow 288 seedlings, more than doubling the amount of seedlings that I'm able to grow in the same amount of space. Can you see how it's a fine balance between maximizing the space that you have available so that you can grow as many seedlings as possible, with also what's doing best for the health of your seedling? For me, the 72 cell tray, with a few exceptions, is sort of the compromise between these two factors. The reason that I often encourage new growers to start with the 72 cell tray is that for most flower varieties, the 72 cell is sufficient space for a seed to grow into a large and bulky enough plant start, but it won't require repotting before it's time to transplant into the garden. And if I'm being really specific, my absolute favorite seed starting tray is a 72 cell seed tray that comes from Bootstrap Farmer. I'll actually link that exact tray in the description box below if you're interested. Now, I believe that I shared in previous videos how I stumbled across the Bootstrap Farmer brand, but 5 seasons into growing flowers, and I can honestly say that I haven't found a tray that compares in strength and quality to this tray. Even full of soil, the Bootstrap Farmer trays, they don't buckle. They're really a durable tray, and for me, it's worth it to spend the extra $1 or $2 per tray because I know that I won't need to replace them near as quickly. So let's discuss some instances when I would choose to use a different sort of tray. If you're struggling with germination with some of your seeds, tools like heat mats and humidity domes can be useful in helping you achieve those ideal situations for your seeds to germinate. Now I'm going to interject a quick note on humidity domes right here because this is a question that I get frequently in my DMs. But know that humidity domes, they don't generally snap onto your trays. They more or less just rest on top. I know it sometimes seems like they should snap, and it can leave some growers questioning if they bought the wrong domes. But as you can see in this video clip right here, my domes are placed just on top of the tray, and the condensation inside is proof enough that the dome is trapping in moisture like it should. Now, while I look at my equipment as a necessary investment in my business, sometimes you just don't have the extra money to spend so that every tray has its own heat mat and humidity dome. And so one of the ways around this may be to use a smaller cell tray to start with. A 128 cell tray is great because you can start a good number of seeds in a small space, and this single tray fits nicely on a single heat mat. In my experience, you just have to be careful that you're monitoring your 128 and smaller cell trays to make sure that they have enough space for your seedlings to grow until they're ready for transplant. You may find that you'll need to bump up your seedlings into a larger tray so that they can continue to grow until it's time to transplant them outside. Speaking of more room, if there's one flower variety that I definitely recommend that you give plenty of room to, it's the sweet peas. Sweet peas are known for their large root system, and for that reason, I always use a 50 cell tray when starting my sweet pea seeds. In recent years, I've actually switched to using these 50 cell extra deep trays for sweet peas as it allows more room for root development. We actually use these deep 50 cell trays for an increasing number of our crops. We start our ranunculus and anemone corms in these. And I even pot up my paper white bulbs into these trays. All of these varieties I just mentioned are flowers that can benefit from a little extra space for their roots. Now, before you go crazy and grow all sorts of flowers in these types of trays, I will caution you. In my experience, these trays are a little bit more difficult when it comes to regulating moisture. Personally, I feel like these trays, they don't wick up moisture from the bottom drain holes as well, and so I often find myself overhead watering when I'm using these trays versus bottom watering. And I just find it a little bit more difficult to actually gauge the amount of moisture at the very bottom of these deep cells. I think it's much easier to maintain consistent amount of moisture than any of the other more standard trays that are just 2 to 3 inches deep. Now the next tray that I want to share with you is a little bit unique. This is a 20-row channel tray, and this is something I'd recommend if you are someone that hates sowing small seeds. We all know the struggle that comes when you're trying to sow something like snapdragons or herbs like oregano. The seeds are just so tiny that it can be difficult to even decipher what is a seed versus just a speck of dirt. I'll admit, some seasons I have the patience, to sit at my seed starting station and use a moist toothpick to pick up each individual seed and put it into its own individual cell within my cell tray. But other seasons I find myself in such a hurry, or I just don't want to bother with the especially tiny seeds, and in these instances I pull out my channel trays. Now the purpose of this tray is that you'll be able to fill each channel with soil. You'll indent your soil to create a small channel for seeds to be poured into. Unlike a cell tray where you're placing one seed into each cell, with this tray you're simply pouring seeds the length of your channel. Usually 100 seed packet is enough for one channel. So as you can see, this is a huge time saver for getting seeds started. Now I'll treat this like any other seed tray, and I can fill more channels if I'd like with different varieties of flowers, but I'll usually put this on a heat mat and place a humidity dome over top. Once the seeds have germinated and my seedlings have put on just a little growth, I'll pop these out of their channel and then pop them into my favorite 72 cell trays, where they'll continue to grow until I'll plant them out in my garden. Now, for a lot of people, having to handle these baby seedlings is much easier than having to deal with the eye strain that can come from trying to separate tiny seeds into individual cells. A channel tray, it is a two-step process instead of just one, like when you're seeding directly into a cell tray, so you may have to do a little trial and error to see if this process works for you. But it is a great workaround, especially if you're someone that struggles with planting small seeds. I will also use a channel tray if I have a flower variety that doesn't have great germination. By planting lots of seeds in a single channel and then only bumping up the seeds that actually germinated, I can avoid those instances where I have trays that have lots of empty spaces because the seeds I planted there simply didn't germinate. One more thing to note about these channel trays is that if you're going to bottom water these trays often fit better using a shallow bottom watering tray. I'll link this below in the description box. But they fit much better with this sort of system rather than usually a traditional 10-20 bottom watering tray. Now the last tray that I want to share with you today is a new tray that I'm trialing this season. And honestly, I'm pretty excited about these. So far in this video, I've shared with you the different types of trays that I use for my own seed starting practice. Realize, however, that there is another method of seed starting that eliminates the need for any sort of tray at all. This practice is what we call soil blocking. Instead of planting your seeds into soil held in place by a tray, you plant your seed into a cube of soil. Now, there's some great benefits to soil blocking, the biggest one being that it prevents your seedlings from becoming root bound. In a cell tray, when your seedlings' roots hit the side of the cells, they're forced to grow downward in a spiral, and left in the tray too long, they'll often circle the bottom of the cell, becoming root bound as they tangle together. Soil blocking, however, avoids this problem. When your seedlings reach the outer edge of the soil block and actually come in contact with the outside air, they experience what we call air pruning. Now what this means is that the root, it dries out and it stops outward growth, and it signals secondary root development within the soil block. Overall, you get a more developed, fuller root system for your seedling. Now, despite these amazing benefits, I just don't have the patience myself to plant my seeds into soil blocks. It can sometimes be a finicky process, and I just much prefer the convenience of seed trays. Air prune trays are sort of a hybrid method of seed starting that allows you to experience the benefits of soil blocking because the trays are designed in such a way that your seedlings can air prune themselves, but they have the added convenience of a tray. Now, I will be curious to see if my seedlings that grow in this tray are in fact healthier than those grown in my more standard cell trays. For this reason, I've only purchased a handful of these air prune trays so far this season, so I could get a feel for how they perform for me. You know, my plan is to use them on flower varieties that are particularly sensitive to root disturbance. My thoughts are that if I can grow a more robust root system on those sort of plants, they'll likely transplant into my garden much more smoothly and overall perform better, as they'll have less chance of transplant shock. I mean, that's at least my theory. I will say that these trays are sort of an investment. When purchased just one at a time, these air prune trays average about $15 a piece. Now, you can save money by buying more in a pack, and I think that when you buy 10 at a time, the price goes down to $10 a tray. I'll link a few different options for you in the description box below. Now, even at $10 a piece, that is still a significant jump from your more standard seed trays. I will say that these are incredibly well-made trays, so I have no doubt that I'll be able to use them for many seasons. And in that sense, I'm not worrying about getting my money's worth out of them. But I will definitely keep you updated on how these perform for me as the season progresses. So there you have it, an inside peek into the different seed trays that I use in a season. I hope this video gives you some things to consider when you're deciding on which trays that you like to use in growing your own flower starts. Be sure to let me know in the comments below what you decide, as I'm always curious as to what other growers use. Now, that is going to be all for this video. Please, if you have enjoyed the content in this video, let me know by hitting that like button. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well if you haven't already. Thanks for hanging out with me for another fun video. As always, I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye, guys.